Greetings and welcome to Kapoto 360 podcast, where we discuss issues to do with transparency and accountability in public finance management. And we give special attention to the Auditor General's report and the Public Accounts Committee's report on COVID-19 funds. We are 19 days towards their 180 days deadline in prosecuting all those responsible for the misuse of COVID-19 funds. But to discuss this today, I'm joined by a lawyer and a social and economic justice activist, a female leader, Samantha Chioneso Kanoyangwa.
Hello, Liam.
How are you, Samantha?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm sorry I had to cut you short.
No, it's fine.
But anyway, it's good to have you here today. And just to get straight to it, can you give us a brief of your perception around public finance management and then also how then it speaks to issues to do with gender equality, particularly women-oriented issues?
All right, so when we're talking about public finance management, we're looking at the policies, the laws, the programs, and the ensuing services that come from the revenue and also the expenditure by the government. And so we then tend to look at the impact of those programs, policies, etc. on the average Zimbabwean. So we then have to apply a gender lens where we're looking at to what extent these policies, these laws, these services affect women, to what extent they affect men. And that helps us in having a policy or public services that actually respond to the needs of the women. For example, we know that women do most of the work in the household. They need water. So we're looking at water, water supply. To what extent are our citizens provided adequate water, clean and safe water?
Yes.
So that are the issues that we're looking at when we're talking about public finance management and how it relates to public service delivery.
Okay. So just to get into that, with the start of COVID-19 and the herald of lockdowns, marginalized communities, that is mostly women, especially those in the informal sector, and young women, those that are, employed as maids, and then some in teaching vocations, suffered a lot. And then they were marginalized, I would put it across.
Yeah.
And, Section 298 of the Constitution says part of the public expenditure should be used to help develop marginalized communities. But we saw with the coming in of the Net 1 scandal, the COVID-19 funds. So what's your general perception around that?
So when it comes to social security, we need to make sure that our public finances also cater for those groups that you mentioned.
Yes.
But as you rightly put it, we saw the Net 1 scandal, for example. We have people who did not receive those SIM cards, but are registered to have received them.
Yes.
And so questions around transparency and accountability begin to pop up. Who received these funds? What criteria was being used? And, just looking at the answers that we do not get and the possible answers that we feel maybe could be the reasons. We look at corruption.
True.
It is corruption that happened,
Yes.
misuse of public funds. And looking at a national scale, looking at the budget, it then means that we need to have a budget that is people-centered, a budget that looks to those groups that you mentioned, looking at the allocation, the management, and the use of that money.
Yes.
And if at all it does not respond to those groups, then it means that we need to have transparency and accountability in as far as we look at social spending in this country.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also again, so what's then your reaction to, I'd say, government's attitude towards dealing with the issue? For example, Parliament says within 180 days we should have culprits held accountable. That's 6 months from the date of publishing their report. I mean, still, we are now 19 days away from the lapsing of that deadline. And there hasn't been any action. So you as a young woman, and you as a person with keen interest in this matter, what then is your reaction towards that?
It simply means they're not genuine in their commitments. It means that they do not mean what they say. It means that we have a long way to go in as far as realizing the aspirations of this country. Just looking at social spending alone, the poverty datum line, we have a lot of people beyond the poverty datum line. And it means that we need to come together as citizens to ask and probe these questions around transparency and accountability. If we do not do that, then it means we're denying ourselves of our rights, because this is part of our social and economic rights. And yeah, so I would say that there really is no political will, and for that we need to really come together and also try to engage the parliaments, our members of parliament. They are our voice within the House of Parliament. And so if we manage to break through to them and have them stand up for us and communicate these issues, then maybe we can get to somewhere. Otherwise, like you're rightfully saying, we are nearing the deadline. The 180 days is coming to an end and nothing has been done.
True.
Something really needs to give.
But in line with that, especially when we now draw the link between public finance management, transparency, and as well as gender equality, with the current ratio of females to males in parliament, do you think also it speaks to how such issues are under prioritized?
It really does, and without needing to go political, it still becomes a political issue, because it means that we don't have enough women contesting for these positions to be members of parliament. If anything, it then means even us as the citizenry do not back up these women, especially young women. Looking at the seats that are given to women, well, some would want to debate around it as to, it's just us giving women space, but they're not really active. But I truly believe that opening up space is a start. Opening up the platform is a start. And then capacitating the women to be able to ask questions around transparency and accountability when it comes to public finance management would be also a good start. So that we have female voices in parliament standing up for us and talking about these issues to do with unpaid care work and how it relates to public service delivery. Yes.
So now that you said that women are underrepresented, then what's your perception around the budgeting towards things like gender-based violence response mechanisms or support systems, which most women are, affected by? So then what's your general reaction then as to, I think, in fact, what's your assessment of how government has performed so far?
Well, when it comes to allocation and distribution of finances towards that, it's lukewarm. More can be done. More can be done, because it's a fact that women, especially during the lockdown, we're going through gender-based violence. We also even have men, because it doesn't necessarily just prescribe to meaning women. But I think that a lot has to be done. A lot can be done. More finances can be allocated towards, having a responsive mechanism for gender-based violence victims. I think that with non-governmental organizations working around the issues, I feel like government has been, relaxed when it comes to addressing such issues. They feel like the gap is being covered by all these NGOs. But I think that, first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that government has an obligation to respond to those problems and challenges. And so I think that government should not wait for NGOs to be the ones raising these issues and assisting the gender-based violence victims. But I think that they should take a leading stand. They should show and act by example.
Okay. Then also again, there was a recent report where it was said government made an allocation towards provision of sanitary wear to learners in primary and secondary institutions. And it was, I think, an amount of about $16, an equivalent of $16 per learner. But they haven't received this. Then the second thing was also about how, the government promised to purchase ambulances. In fact, reported to have purchased ambulances, and they haven't done that. What do you think might be the general cause of that? And from a perspective of the fact that women are the ones mostly affected by these issues?
I think that there's a clear situation that is being created, so much that corruption will be able to prevail. like you're rightfully saying, that $16 has not been disbursed to the pupils yet. And so we then start to think, why the delay? What is necessitating the delay, if it is to be, necessary to delay even? I think we are talking about the need for young people, young girls to be specific, to have sanitary wear, because it's an urgent need. Every single month you need to respond to that need. But I think, corruption is likely to take place concerning the ambulances, procurement flows, procurement procedures that are being, ignored in totality. I think the Auditor General reports have been, replete with cases of procedural flaws by local authorities, for example. And we see non-delivery where payment has been made.
True.
So it really means that we have, corruption, grant corruption taking place. And there are people who are taking advantage of these deals, so to say, so that they may be able to benefit from them. At the expense of the citizens. Affecting women, it truly does affect women. I mean, ambulances, we're looking at how, for example, a woman would need to rush to the hospital, probably because they are going into labor. It means that there's no ambulance. I think recently, just in Harare, there was a case of a young woman who gave birth in a toilet.
Oh,
Yes, and, such issues, you start to think, if truly that clinic could not help her, surely they could have called an ambulance and she could have gone to Harare Hospital, Perinyatwa, or any other hospital that could cater to her needs. But because there are no ambulances, and yet we paid money to buy ambulances, you start to think, okay, so where are we going wrong? As citizens, we need to come together and ask, how far NEMA ambulances, for example?
Yes.
I see you're wearing a how far t-shirt.
Yes, of course.
How far NEMA ambulances at Rabada?
Okay.
Where are they?
Yeah, well, that's quite summative. Then, so with regards to that, then, do you have confidence? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but as young women, or as Zimbabwean women, because the most of you are young, do you then have confidence in the accountability monitoring infrastructure that is existent today? For example, your parliament, your anti-corruption commission, your CID, and law and order. Do you then, have confidence in the mechanisms present?
All right. To some extent, I do have some confidence. I mean, these institutions that we created as the people of Zimbabwe to act for and on behalf of us as citizens, so that they may be able to, ask these pertinent questions and, just proffer transparency and accountability to such issues. But I think that, it's high time as citizens that we take our own initiative to the transparency and accountability mechanisms. And I'm sorry, I'll keep referring to HALFA, but I think that is a very great initiative. It allows you as a citizen to be able to ask those questions on your own without necessarily waiting for your member of parliament to do that in, the House of Assembly. So it's just you as an average citizen asking, how far how far nema road akanaka ekufambira, how far maternal health services, just asking those questions. And if each and every Zimbabwean is able to notice that there is a gap here that needs to be addressed, we need to ask questions that are pertinent towards achieving transparency and accountability, then we will reach somewhere. That is the confidence I have. I have confidence in our own Zimbabweans practicing their own citizenship.
Okay. So that also comes to, when we look at Zimbabweans practicing their own citizenship, I think more than 50% or close to 51% of our population is female.
Yeah.
And even in elections, I think it is 51% again of people that vote are females, right? And you guys are the ones mostly participating in citizenship. But then what could be then the lack in terms of the rest of the others that don't really turn up, especially in things like voting and attending those public consultations? And on another level of that question, what could be then the challenges that lead to such a scenario where you hear that the youth turnout, that is also inclusive of young women, is maybe 44% and below in exercising their right to vote. So what then do you think, one, is the cause, and two, what could be the possible challenges that lead to such a scenario?
All right. I think that firstly, it's our inability to make the connection between our right to vote, what I could call our civil and political rights, and our social and economic rights. You cannot separate the two.
Yes.
Who you vote for is going to determine whether you're going to get the full realization and protection and promotion of your social and economic rights.
Yeah.
And so if we begin to understand that, we will learn that it is very important for you as a young person, precisely, to go and register to vote. And not just register to vote, but actually go out on the day to register to vote. For whatever political party that you're interested in.
True.
Just having your voice, practicing your citizenship. Another thing is that we have got a political economy that has been largely politicized.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about such issues, it then sounds like maybe, we have got, some statements like, no, the elections are always rigged. There's always violence in the next elections. Sometimes it is true, sometimes it's not true. But the thing is, those kind of conversations then tend to make people, especially young people, lose confidence in the election system. And so one then starts to ask, okay, so what is really the point of, going to vote? What is the point of registering to vote? But like I said, it is very important for us to make the connection and the relationship between our civil and political rights and our social and economic rights. Once we understand that, we'll be better able to practice our citizenship and have confidence in our own voice, because casting a vote is you having a say in how you think that the country should be run and how you think you should be able to get adequate public service delivery.
So, one thing I can't ignore, I know you don't like it, but it's the fact that you have a legal background.
Yeah.
And coming from a legal perspective, what then do you think might be the major cause of misuse of funds in Zimbabwe's public finance management systems? And secondly, what also could be the solution from a legal perspective?
All right. I'm glad that you bring up that question, because I've done a number of research and papers around, just the relationship between law and policy, for example, in public finance management issues. I've looked at public debt management, the laws that are there when we're looking at public debt management. And just looking at those legal instruments that we have, you find that most of them are actually inconsistent with the Constitution. So, and as far as we have Section 298 of the Constitution talking about transparency, accountability, prudence, finance management, it's not what we're experiencing, or the kind of vibe, so as to say,
the vibe is not correct.
The vibe is not correct. When we're looking at, the principal acts, your Public Finance Management Act, your Public Debt Management Act. And so we need to address those gaps.
Yeah.
They have to be consistent. They have to be in alignment. And once we have that, then we also need to have certain provisions that speak to, what can I say? Like that respond to cases of, for example, corruption or mismanagement of public funds.
Yeah.
If you mismanage funds, then at least we need to have a provision that says the action that will be taken is you will be arrested. Investigation committee will be made up so that we investigate as to whether you are guilty of this allegation or not. And I feel like we don't have enough penalty clauses in our public finance management instruments. There are no penalties. And so, for example, we have the Minister of Finance getting public finances like debts without the authorization of the Parliament, for example. Nothing is being done to them, because there's no penalty in our Public Debt Management Act that says if he does not seek the authority from Parliament, then such action will be taken. So such issues, penalty clauses should be pertinent. They should be part of our legal instruments. If that is not there, then we'll have a serious problem where we have people violating many provisions in our legal instruments, but no penalties to the same.
Okay. Yeah. Speaking of the Minister of Finance, there's a growing trend. Like there's a trending scandal around the use of the close to approximately 1 billion SDR funds. Remember, we even had attended a workshop on that, and very little is accounted for. There is no clear accountability as to how the funds were used and who benefited. And remember, we said in times of crisis, mostly public spending should be to service vulnerable communities and those that are largely dominated by women. So, as a young female lawyer, what's your reaction to that, and what do you think might be the gap that exists, or maybe what could be the source of that crisis occurring?
So if you see how they say that they spent the money, some of the SDR funds went towards procuring ambulances, some of them COVID-19 vaccines. But like what you're rightfully saying, we don't have, a clear list, for example, of the beneficiaries of those COVID-19 vaccines to say they went to such and such a hospital, or the ambulances went to such and such a hospital. So, like I mentioned earlier before, this is fertile ground for corruption, fertile ground for mismanagement of funds. And responding to that as a young female, I feel we're not doing ourselves any justice by just highlighting that, the SDR funds are almost used up, and we don't have, just a clear idea of how they were spent. We need to start asking questions. How were they spent? We need to ask the relevant authorities, how did they spend? They need to come to us and give feedback, because remember, we are under a social contract. And with the social contract, there are obligations and rights. They have an obligation to perform duties on our behalf and report back to us. We have a right to ask as to how they spent those SDR funds. And so, again, we really need to start asking questions around transparency and accountability. Everyone should be able to ask, what happened to those SDR funds? What were they used for? Can we see what they were used for? We need to have tangible proof.
And then, speaking of issues to do with proof, there is, the trending $9,000 laptop scandal on Parliament.
Yeah.
The proof is there, and no action is being taken. Even Chokuda himself, Mr. Chokuda actually admitted that some of his staff were involved. No names were actually put. What could be the cause of the delay, or what could be the reason for the drag down in dealing with such issues?
I feel like it's become the norm. And when it has become the norm that we see this abuse of public funds, for example, it then doesn't become news in the sense that, it's anything new. I mean, yes, we can talk about it and then we can have a weekend of this frenzy, like 9,000 laptops, how, But it dies down eventually. And they know that it will die down.
No.
And so they're also reluctant about acting on it. You don't see any remorse. You don't see any action to rectify. And I feel like our parliament has a bigger role to play. They need to keep pushing. They need to keep asking questions, because they see Mr. Chokuda, for example, on a daily basis. We don't get to see him on a daily basis. But we can have a voice and continue to push and ask, But the parliament is closer. So looking at the relationship the parliament has with Mr. Chokuda, for example, they need to keep pressing until something is done, until he gives. We all need to keep on, talking about $9,000 laptops, because I remember it was just a weekend and, everyone was like, 9,000, 9,000, 9,000. And then it died down. Yeah. So we really need to start asking. If we hadn't started asking, if we had started, we need to continue until we have solid proof and evidence that, okay, it was rectified. It's just like when we look at the Pomona waste to energy deal. Yeah. There was a frenzy. and then it's sort of like delayed, and then we're talking about it, pomona. But right up to this point, it has not been resolved. And clearly our stance and our voice, in as far as the activity is concerned, when the deal was brokered and now it's totally different.
Mm-hmm.
The vibe is different. So we need to heighten our vibe. We need to be consistent. That's the other thing. We need to be consistent in this fight for social and economic justice in as far as our public finance management is concerned. We cannot make noise today and be quiet tomorrow.
True.
We need to be consistent in asking questions to do with transparency and accountability. So I feel like the $9,000 laptop happened. We made noise, but we still need to make noise. And I'm sorry to use the word noise because it's not noise. It's actually, coherent conversations that need to keep happening.
True.
Yes. So that's what I think.
Okay. Then, just to, sum up, we are headed towards 2023 elections.
Mm-hmm.
And, elections is also part of how we hold government and elected officials accountable.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your message to young people?
Mm-hmm.
Given that we spoke of, the electoral attitude, and you yourself as a young woman, or in fact just as a woman, you guys participate the most. But what's your message to other young women there ahead of 2023?
My message would be, please make an effort to make the connection between your civil and political rights and your social and economic rights. Your voice matters. Your voice matters to an extent that, for young people, I think for most young people, they find issues to do with politics and, the political economy boring. But I can tell you that such discussions would determine the policies and the programs and the kind of development that you're going to have. It will clearly even determine, the price of your data package.
True. Hey, net one.
You see.
Yeah.
So it's understanding that it trickles down to the most basic need that you think as a young people is important to you at whatever stage in your life. So just making that connection between your political and social and economic rights will prove to be important. And so you just need to register to vote and go out on the day. Your voice matters. That is what we need to know. Your voice matters. If you do not practice your citizenship, someone will practice it on behalf of you.
Profound. Well, that was Samantha Chioneso Kanoyangwa, a lawyer and a young female social and economic justice activist. I'm Liam Kanenga. This was Kapoto 360 podcast, and she reminded you to go register and vote, as well as to vote on the day. See you next time.